Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, senior editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the Safe Camp Audio Network. Check out our show page and all of Safe Camp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at Safe Camp Audio on social media. We are doing headlines this week. I'm probably going to keep it a little short. The allergy season is upon us. It's making my voice a little scratchy here. But let's get through it. And we're going to start, as we often do these days, with the latest child welfare news out of Washington, D.C., where the First Lady Melania Trump announced a new wrinkle to her Fostering the Future initiative around connecting youth in foster care to Trump accounts. Imprint reporter Michael Fitzgerald was on the scene in D.C. for the announcement, and I'll, of course, link to his story for much more detail on it. But here is the gist. Trump accounts were created as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill last year, and it's basically an investment vehicle for children that can be contributed to through their 18th birthday. And after 18, it can be drawn upon to pay for school or for a first-time home purchase, or it can just essentially convert into an independent retirement account or an IRA and be used later in life. Now, families can contribute up to $5,000 a year into these Trump accounts. And then the big sweetener that was part of the big beautiful bill was for newborns between 2025 and 2028, parents could claim a free $1,000 from Uncle Sam for those accounts. And I did a little research before I started today just to see how many parents had taken Uncle Sam up on that. It looks like it's like a decent amount. We're not going to know how many Trump accounts officially have been opened until July 4th. So just in a couple of weeks, that's when they officially take effect. But through tax filings, you can tell that several million children have had accounts at least get into the setup stage. So we will see. So the announcement last week was essentially guidance creating this pathway, optional, not mandatory, for states to create these Trump accounts for youth who are in foster care, of which there are more than 300,000 kids in foster care. Now, Arkansas maybe got a little ahead of the White House news cycle on this and announced the day before Melania Trump stepped out into the event that they'd be doing this. They'd be opening Trump accounts for all of foster youth. And then when I saw that, I asked them, would they be facilitating the federal contribution for infants? And then also, what was the plan for other youth? And they said they would be doing the federal claiming for infants or newborns and had no plans necessarily for the rest of the kids, which is obviously the vast majority of them. But the federal guidance on the rules of the game here say differently. So a little bit. The Child Welfare Agency, per the guidance that came out after Melania Trump's announcement of this, say that the Child Welfare Agency can start the accounts up, but only the parent, or in most cases, also the foster parent, could do the necessary claiming for that federal money available to the newborns. So for any baby in foster care who was born between January 1st, 2025 and now, and going forward into 2028, the parents can, assuming a Trump account is started, the parents can claim that money. Also, a foster parent who basically has a reasonable expectation of the child being with them for the rest of the year so that they can count a tax time as a dependent, they can also claim for the $1,000. And that is significant because that is the dreaded second degree of separation that can always endanger any available resource from actually getting to the intended person. And by that, I mean, if it was, let's say you had a state child welfare agency that was really revved up and motivated to kind of work with the Trump administration on this, if they can go in and initiate the claim for the $1,000, that's something that the bureaucracy could probably handle. Now they are relying, I guess I'm assuming they're reading the laws to mean they have to do this. They're going to have to rely on the word getting to the parents or the word getting to the foster parents, and then those people going forward and claiming the money for the kids. And this is just free money, right? So we hope However you feel about the Trump accounts and the big, beautiful bill, I personally hope every child out there gets the free $1,000 they're entitled to. Now, that doesn't mean the states don't have an ability to contribute here. States, as well as philanthropies, are allowed to put money into these accounts, and it can be above and beyond that $5,000 limit, right? The $5,000 limit refers to how much the family can put in. But if a state wanted to get involved or a philanthropy wanted to get involved, they can put much more in. And the guidance that the Trump administration put out after the event really stressed that unobligated funds from a program called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, could be used for this endeavor. That would obviously be easier for states that have a bunch of TANF cash in their rainy day fund. And there are a bunch of those. I believe Oklahoma has the biggest arsenal of it. They might have $500 million. But those arsenals of extra TANF dollars that are left over aren't there because states are dying to spend them. Quite the opposite. So it's a pretty open question, I think, whether this effort is going to yield a ton of money for the savings of most foster youth. But I will give you one way that could maybe change this as I segue to our next Washington, D.C. story, and that is the introduction and initially quick movement of the Preventing Waste, Fraud, and Abuse in TANF Act, which was sponsored by Republican Mike Carey of Ohio. It is a bill that was introduced in the Ways and Means Committee, quickly passed there, and it looked like it was going to move pretty quickly in the House. I do think there is a Senate mirror version of it. And so what this bill does, we've talked on the podcast before about in the last year or so, the House Ways and Means Committee holding a bunch of hearings that were kind of paired up with some GAO reports around fraudulence or problems or challenges or criticisms of the TANF program from different angles. And so this is a bill that I don't think is all encompassing and attempts to fix TANF. I do expect there'll probably be other bills that come out related to TANF in the next year or so. But this one from Republican Mike Carey makes two big changes to TANF. The first one is that the bill limits eligibility to families earning 200% of the federal poverty level, about $51,000 for a family of three. Currently, states have a lot of discretion in determining their own threshold for who they would work with in TANF. So this is taking a lot of flexibility state by state and creating a new hard limit of 200% nationally. Also, if passed in the House and Senate and signed by the president, states would have 3 years to spend their TANF funds before the money would have to be returned to the federal government. And there's no current limit on how long states can hang on to that money. Per Michael Fitzgerald's reporting on this, federal data shows that they have used that discretion to accumulate up to $10 billion total in reserves across all the states. Now, I'd say the most impactful of those two changes within TANF is probably the income limit. I perceive that to be a way they're trying to get at the most fraudulent or at least misapplied uses of TANF for programming, like the volleyball arena that Brett Favre somehow got connected to, where it's kind of clearly not meant to help the lowest income families achieve stability and a path to employment. But certainly taking any regulation that was essentially states get to make this up for themselves or decide this for themselves, and then switching it to a hard cap, that's going to force states into at least changes to their bureaucracy and how they determine what gets paid for in TANF. That second change about the length of time that states have to spend their TANF dollars, forcing that accumulation of TANF funds to be short-lived, that might put some states into a position of having to spend a lot of TANF money in a pretty short amount of time, 3 years, or risk losing it. Now, that's assuming that the way this law, if passed, was regulated, the existing rainy day funds are included and somehow they're not grandfathered in. That doesn't count. It's just money going forward. But you can see if there's money that a lot of states have backed up and saved in their TANF accounts that they haven't spent yet, you can see where now you might have a scenario where states will be like coming up with ways to spend it down. And here comes the White House with a pre-approved lane where you don't have to worry about getting dinged for not using it right. They have preordained that putting a bunch of this money into these Trump accounts for foster youth is an okay use of it. And kind of now that I think about it, I was trying to connect this to the Trump accounts thing. I think if these rainy day funds that everybody has, or not everybody, but a lot of states have with their TANF dollars, are going to be subject, if this law passes and they're subject to this 3-year rule, we're going to see an all out advocacy lobbying war if that law passes, with various factions jockeying for states to make different uses of those TANF arsenals. So let's call that a watch this space situation. It did, like I mentioned at the top, really look like there was a vote scheduled, I think, for the House to vote on this as a full body. And then that got pulled back. So it seems like they were really trying to move this quickly because they knew that some states would certainly have some feelings about the rainy day funds and the changes. And then as folks got wind of what was about to come, I think the gears kind of ground to a halt. So we'll see. We're going to switch here from the federal policy and law to some national research that just came out that I think is going to really reverberate not only around child welfare and youth justice discussions, but really just child development policy more broadly. And this is a major study that was published in the journal Science. It analyzed MRI scans from more than 2,300 9 and 10-year-olds, and it was using this federally funded adolescent brain cognitive development study. And here's what they found. Socioeconomic factors are by far the dominant influence on children's brain's development, dwarfing previously studied variables like IQ or mental health. So what they found is that kids who grew up in lower income neighborhoods with limited social support showed measurable brain differences visible on MRI scans, and those specifically were in the areas related to sensory processing and in motor control. So they traced the mechanism here to sleep deprivation, chronic stress, and heavy screen time, all of which are more prevalent in under-resourced neighborhoods. I'm paraphrasing from the research here. And that alters the brain circuits that regulate alertness and wakefulness. So this certainly seems big and is going to force a rethinking of the conventional wisdom that cognitive ability and mental health are this straight line link to brain development. This research is suggesting that alone might not be enough to overcome deficits that they see connected in the data to socioeconomic support and status. And so the lead researcher, Washington University's Dr. Scott Merrick, who I've respectfully asked to join us on the podcast to parse through this a little bit more deeply. Hopefully he'll say yes. He put it plainly in talking about this with reporters, and I'm just going to quote him here. The data are screaming that we should be looking at sleep, stress, and screens. All right, we'll take a quick break and come right back with some more headlines.
The National Association of Counsel for Children advances children's and parents' rights by supporting a diverse, inclusive community of child welfare lawyers to provide zealous legal representation, and by advocating for equitable, anti-racist solutions co-designed by people with lived experience. Learn more at naccchildlaw.org, counselforkids.org, and at our National Child Welfare Law Conference in Portland, Oregon this August.
All right, I'm going to rip through a few more headlines of note. First, a few from other outlets, and then I'll wrap up as usual with some recommendations on pieces written by my colleagues here at the Imprint. These first two, one is an article and one is actually just some info I stumbled on off of a press release, and I'm going to tie them together here for you. The first one is about a program in Kentucky that was a state-funded kinship reunification program that, per WKYT's reporting there in Kentucky, is going to be shutting down at the end of this month, in the month of June. That program has served more than 1,000 families in 4 counties since 2022. It's called the Kindred Roots Program. And like I said, it is a kinship reunification program. And this is in, just for some context, there was born a federal circuit court decision that forced Kentucky and all the other states in the circuit to really get serious about supporting kin who were approved to take care of kids in foster care in the same way that they would support other foster parents, right? They're strangers who become licensed and join the foster care community. So this is a program that was working specifically to reunify kids with their parents after kinship placements. started in 2022 and is going away. Now, the other one I want to call out, this is from Sacramento County in California, where a number of budget chops are on the table as the county attempts to balance things out. And here's just a few that popped up as I obtained a document with some of the proposed ones. And I will say I'm not entirely sure where they are in the process here. When I got this, these changes were on the table. I'm not sure if any or all of them have gone through, but Sacramento County had its own sort of enhanced rate for residential care in the county. So it's basically adding a layer of extra support on to the sort of federal state mix that went to short-term residential therapeutic programs. And obviously the idea behind that is to make working with Sacramento County more attractive so that they can have the beds that they need for that space. That was like a $1.5 million cut. There was $450,000 cut on the table for contracted transportation services supporting foster youth and non-minor dependents. And this is around school of origin stuff. There's 2 federal laws that basically almost get to the point of saying that states have to honor a foster youth's request to stay in their school of origin if that is what they want and the court agrees that it's in their best interest. There's sort of always a food fight. Not always, I shouldn't say that, but there's a question that is not entirely tied up in federal policy around who pays for the transportation there. But anyway, some states and some localities have gotten serious about trying to make this work. And obviously contracts for transportation services are a part of doing that. So this is $450,000 that has been approved in recent years and is now slated to go away. And then the last one was a $380,000 cut to a program that was called Reduce Child Abuse Prevention Council and Beyond Family Resource Center. So the situation going on in New York City is a proposal to cut foster care prevention services and reunification services. And the reason I'm tying these two together, that list I just gave you out of Sacramento and what is going on in Kentucky with this kinship reunification, is this is new programs. So I think what I'm seeing in these two is there was extra money headed out from the federal government to states and then sometimes devolved down into counties after COVID. And that some of that money was to account for shortfalls in the moment and to make sure that people in an emergency situation were taken care of. And then there was some of that money that states used to do things that maybe they just didn't feel like they had the money to do and now had a little extra cash lying around and started to do it. And it is not a given that when money is thrown out there in an emergency situation, it's going to stay that way, or that federal budget lines are going to hold at those levels, right? That actually shouldn't be the expectation with emergency money. But it is really too bad that it's such a short-lived cycle of dollars that if these cuts go into place, it actually really makes it hard to know what the results were. I think that probably people involved in the kinship reunification program in Kentucky would say it was going well and they were doing really well. I think they did have a very high placement stability rate coming out of it, but 2.5 fiscal years or whatever it was, that's a really small window to be able to truly evaluate, was this something that government should continue doing? Just an observation, I think that we're going to start to see more of this, especially in the next fiscal year, as states are really starting to grapple with what the changes to Medicaid and a few other major federally funded entitlements are out of the big, beautiful bill. Okay, next headline. All states have had some version of extended foster care to 21 for a while now, although some of those are not the full offer of housing and financial support and case management that you would think of as extended foster care. Only about half, I think it's maybe a little more than half now, of states have connected their extended foster care offer to the federal approval that kind of unlocks federal money to pay for it. And the one sort of holdout for this for a very long time was Oklahoma, which had never really had any form of extended foster care until now. And they appear to have gone with a pretty robust program on paper. We'll see how it plays out in real life, where youth can stay in until age 21 and they can also re-enter until 21 if they did choose to leave and thought differently later. The law includes the federal rules on extended foster care as long as the participants are working towards their education, seeking employment or have independent living goals that they're working towards, they can stay in, and that can be counted as a federally funded extended foster care placement. So I'm presuming, since they wrote it around the federal expectations, that Oklahoma will seek out approval to connect its program with those federal Title 4E dollars. Few headlines that caught my eye because they seemed like kind of novel ideas. One, and I'll drop a link to all of these, of course. I know I say that almost as a verbal tick here, but they will be if you want to read more. Clark County in Nevada has just opened up a health and wellness clinic specifically for current and former foster youth. It's going to be located on the Child Haven campus in East Las Vegas. And it is a partnership between First Med Health, which is a nonprofit healthcare provider, and Clark County Family Services. So this is basically built as like this one-stop shop. Your primary care, blood draws, dental services, psychological and behavioral counseling will all exist under this one roof. They expect it to be about 60 kids per day across 4 medical exam rooms and 3 dentist chairs and a few therapy rooms. This is already active. Clark County has, I think, 3,400 kids in foster care. So this is a pretty big undertaking. And hit me up at tips@imprintnews.org if this doesn't seem novel to you. I read it and thought, obviously, there are clinics that serve foster youth. This was the first I had seen a clinic that was expressly dedicated only to serving them. And I think you're seeing this as a movement in the sort of housing advocacy space for foster youth, as well as this idea of the way to get to higher quality options for youth in these systems is to create these direct lanes that only they can use and have that sort of that targeted approach to them, as opposed to just getting them access to what everybody else has. And then the second kind of novel idea department story was out of Cincinnati, where the Hamilton County Administrative Judge, Carrie Bloom, I'm not sure which, I apologize, has launched what she is dubbing a Summer of Discovery program. And that will be requiring juveniles with pending low-level cases to complete these new pretrial requirements effective this month. And those requirements are going and getting a library card, signing up at a local rec center for like evening rec or after school rec, could be a rec center or a YMCA, and bringing their last quarter grades to their next court hearing. And I'm just quoting Bloom from one of the stories about this. Rec at night is something that all kids look forward to and want to go to. I'm not ordering them to attend. I'm ordering them to go there and see what resources exist here for me. So pretty interesting gambit. Maybe we'll try and get Judge Bloom on to see how it went. I don't know if they're like tracking data on this and seeing if everybody went through and got a library card or went to rec, right? But not a terrible idea to use that time in between an arrest and when you got to go to court to face the music, to see if you can get a young person just to be aware of other things they could be doing other than what they are alleged to have done, right? So let's wrap up here with a few Imprint reads that I want to recommend. First is a kind of amusing thing that our Sushanti Sarkar reported on New York City's plans to cut millions of spending on prevention services within its child welfare agency. I'm not saying that's amusing. I'll tell you in a minute why this is amusing. And that child welfare agency is called the Administration on Children's Services in New York City. These cuts involve the cancellation of 4 contracts. So you can read Sushanti's story to kind of get more detail on sort of what exactly happened here. The quirky part here is that our story on their proposed cuts to prevention services then got clipped and used in social media by the Trump administration's child welfare agency, the Administration for Children and Families, which was criticizing the Mamdani administration for curtailing efforts to prevent foster care in the city, which, fair enough, but the Trump administration has frozen billions of dollars for New York State that a lot of them could be construed as things you would do to prevent foster care. Obviously, those cuts at the state level impact New York City services. That was all done as part of a fraud investigation that I do not think has yielded any findings of fraud in New York yet. So anyway, prompted a food fight on social media. Second is a piece by Jeremy Laudenbeck on a new report called Abortion Insights from Conversations with Youth in Foster Care, which sought to, just extract information from current and former foster youth about how they got information and made decisions around abortion. It's well worth a full read. Here's just a snippet from Jeremy's piece, and I'm quoting from his work here. Survey participants reported they first learned about abortion from the media, religious institutions, and the opinions of adults in their lives, rather than from medically accurate information. Initially, they had negative perceptions of abortion, describing it as a scary, wrong, or unsafe. Further quoting, several youth reported they felt they had no real choice and were pushed to make a significant medical decision without meaningful scientific information or a full understanding of their options, end quote. Okay, last one for this week, and this is also from New York State. This is a story that Sushanti Sharkar wrote, looking at new data that suggests that foster youth are the subject of out-of-school suspensions at a wildly higher rate than their peers. This work focused on basically New York minus New York City, so it's looking at 4 big metro areas outside of the city. Here are the out-of-school suspension rates for those counties. Buffalo, 26% of students in foster care experienced at least one out-of-school suspension, 17% in Rochester, 14% in Syracuse, and 11% in Yonkers. And just as a comparative range here for kids who are not in foster care, the lowest of those 4 was Yonkers Public Schools. Only 3% of all kids get suspended. So 3 versus 11% in Yonkers for the foster youth. And then in Buffalo, which had the highest out-of-school suspension rate for overall for students at 11%, you're still looking at more than double for the foster youth in there. And Chantel Hines, who authored the paper, she is now the senior policy manager for Children's Defense Fund in New York, told Sarkar, the appropriate response is to see this data as an alarm, as a signal that something is very wrong. It is not an indictment on the child themselves or some sort of lack of ability. It's an indictment on a system that doesn't provide the appropriate supports and services. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at safecamp.audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elliott. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews and visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can also email us at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.